I assume after the crisis is over that they'll be back to on-site audits, because the remote audit it'll work, but it won't work well.
I gotta kick one of you off. Let's see, who's least attractive?
Kick me off, man.
All right, I didn't want to say it.
We're talking people. I'm a volunteer.
Oh wow! Look, 3 gentlemen went and sacrificed themselves as being less
White old
attractive,
people.
and yet, ironically, Rick was the least attractive of them. Did not volunteer himself. So I accept all of you for going away. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. And we need to get us from Sanjeev, who is actually the presenter.
I'm close by organizer. Oh.
There we go. There he is.
Oh,
well, there he was.
something. Can you see me?
No, you had it for a second, and then you went away, and then there he came back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody,
Yeah.
that's Sanjeev. Now, I'm going to let you do your thing, but I gotta this is for your own good, man. Sit up straight. You're the presenter today. Take some pride in yourself, man.
It looks like he's in a recliner.
He isn't a
Sitting on
recliner. Set the chair back. Put yourself in commanding position, not like this is going to be easy. I'm just going to talk about India. I'm from India. How hard can this be? Come on, man.
There. How's that?
I think you look great. Now, this is completely your choice. Do you want to share any slides today? Or are we going to wax philosophical about the great land from which you hail?
Well, so I think, what we can talk about is what are the things in India that you can do, how you can enter into India, get manufacturing done there. What's the regulatory?
I can hear you better.
What's the regulatory landscape out there,
Mhm.
and what you go about, what's the market like? Those are the critical things I'm pretty sure everyone's wondering about. And then if you are in an early stage, how do you get funded out there? So those are things that I've done in my previous companies. And so we can talk about that.
I'd like that very much. You know, I had a conversation with a friend, also a 10X alumnus, and someone that you met. I'm hoping he joins us today. And he had quite the counter argument to being in India, and he went on and waxed on about how difficult a time it was and how all these things went awry. And he talked about poverty, he talked about inequality, he talked about graft, and I was like, okay, well, my guest this week is going to extol the virtues of India, so that would be quite an interesting counterpoint. But I will leave you to extol first, and then we can address the other side as well.
So very interestingly, what he's saying is actually true. Things are changing, however, right? When you go back years, when I started my earlier company, Actors in India, there was a lot of red tape. They had said they had gotten rid of red tape, but there was a lot of red tape even then. And, the government had put in programs so that you could get companies funded, etc. The regulatory landscape was changing. So there's a lot of issues which came in. Having said that, the government since then has put in all the structures in place to allow you to do things. The red tape is still there, but they've reduced it dramatically. So, one of the big issues that we face all the time is the cost, right? And when you look at how I'd raised about 15 million in India for my previous company, Actors, and that was the equivalent of 150 million. I ran that for about 5 to 6 years. And my VP of R&D, I was paying them 10 lakh rupees, which was about $20,000. So this is back in the in 2008-9. It's gone up slightly, but not that dramatically. So it's still, the costs are much, much lower, at least about 1/4 what it is in the US, right? The regulatory landscape used to be pretty crazy at one time in India, where you had to pay off people, etc. And today that's changed. You have to go through a digital portal, apply for everything. You have to get ethical committee clearances, etc. Just exactly as you do it in the US. So they've set up all these systems which you end up having to follow, and the issues that we had earlier in India with having to pay bribes, etc., has pretty much diminished. I won't say completely gone away, but has diminished. So when you look at it from a cost standpoint and the regulatory aspects, etc., those have all changed over the last decade, and you can literally go in and get things done without having to deal with the bureaucracy which we had to deal with back in the 90s and early 2000s. So, and then the government has put in a lot of SBIR type of grants where you can go in through DBT and Department of Science and Technology and get grants. And then there's a lot of venture capital which has come in, which is investing into companies as well. So you can set up a subsidiary in India and you can get the investment raised there itself, especially if you're a later stage company. There's a lot of money. For earlier stage companies, for research, there's money from the government, but not as much from the private investors. So, and the market is very, very
now you have to do digital. What does that mean? Now you have to go through a digital portal. What is that?
So they've got a digital portal and you enter all the information through there. You do not send loads and loads of paper like we used to send, if you remember, to FDA once upon a time, right? Today, you enter all the information digitally, and you don't know who it's going to. So there's no one that you go and pay off, right? You can't go and pay anyone to get your files moved forward, etc., which in the early 2000s used to be the case. Today, everything is digital. You can't you follow up using the number, and you look at the status of the file on the digital portal itself. So you don't have to. You do go and meet with the DCGI, which is the Indian FDA, and get their feedback, but everything is controlled from the digital portal itself.
Okay.
So it's become a lot. It's changed. So when I was running POC, we set up a distributor in India, and he managed. So rather than getting a clinical trial organization for ourselves, we managed it, or a regulatory person. Our distributor had a regulatory person they hired, and they managed the whole process we sent them all the digital documents, they uploaded it, and within 10 days, we had the certification that everything had been uploaded, and that you could follow on the portal where the files were. And, and in 90 days, they respond back to you if they need any more information, or you need to put in more, or everything is enough. Apparently, in about 6 months, you do get approval to start your clinical trial, assuming you've got all your information in there. And then once
to this term DCGI just now by you, and I just did a quick search, and Wikipedia talks about it as the drug regulatory body. I haven't seen the word medical device here yet. Now I did finally. But the notification of medical device rules in 2017,
Right.
is that how new it's?
Yeah, it's
per medical
CDSCO
devices is?
is the organization which handles, so they've split out the DCGI. Under DCGI, there are two parts. One is the drug part of it, and then there's the device part of it. And in 2017, they changed the regulations quite dramatically, where we could take in any device or drug which was approved here and start marketing it there. Or even if it wasn't, for example, if you took diagnostics, they had only HPV and a few others which had to get approval. Otherwise, you could start marketing them. Today, they've listed everything which doesn't need approval. The rest of it, which needs approval, you have to go through the process, fill out everything. So they've changed the whole system. So 2017, they revamped the whole thing. We were with POC, we applied in the 2017 prior to the revamping, but they gave about 3 years for everyone to get caught up. If they were not approved earlier, they had to go and get approvals on the devices or etc.
Does anyone have a question they want to ask? Anyone doing any business in India or representing anyone who might? And if not, you've mentioned POC a few times. I know of it because you spoke of it as a panelist at 10X. Just a sec, Michelle.
Yep.
Can you tell us what it was and what happened?
Yeah, so POC Medical Systems was a point of care diagnostic company where we developed a test for breast cancer detection. And it actually, we took it into India, we took it into China, we got orders from both the governments in India and China, and also in the Middle East and Africa. And then we were just starting the FDA approval process here. Unfortunately, on the board, our investors decided that they wanted to sell the company at this point, and it was so we were in the process of raising our Series B, and the investors said, no, let's sell the company. They tried to sell it. By that time, we ran out of cash, and the company essentially had to shut down. So in December, the company filed for Chapter 7, even though we had about $20 million worth of orders in our books.
Boy, I'm sorry, that's gotta hurt. And it hurts to even hear the story, so I can only imagine.
Having said that, Joe, for a while I was pretty upset. Luckily, I've made some changes to the design, and me and two other colleagues of mine, we have filed new patents, and we just incorporated a new company called OncosDX, which is essentially doing cancer diagnostics point of care, and specifically for breast cancer. So we have gone back to the government. So once the COVID stuff dies down, then I think we'll be back on that. So.
Hey everybody, Joanne is here. Well, she was. That was anticlimactic. Now Brent wants to show up. That is all right. I can't control these things, people. Jose, yeah, well, it was nice seeing you, Joanne. Jose, would you introduce yourself? Because what we talked about yesterday, I wonder if there's any overlap with what Sanjeev is doing or does.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Jose Borquez.
Okay.
I run a product development firm called Bold Type. We specialize in wireless and connected medical devices, and got a team of about 30 people, really passionate about medical devices and in particular helping entrepreneurs. So all three of the co-founders have experience as entrepreneurs of product companies, and all three of us just really love the product development piece of it. We're less excited about the marketing, sales, distribution, logistics, all of that. So we figure we'll let the people who love that stuff do that, and we'll focus on the part that we really enjoy, which is developing great products And we've built our company around building medical devices, developing medical devices quickly, by focusing. So we focus on products that are wireless and connected, and that's allowed us to create all the infrastructure to do that very efficiently. And yeah, so that's what we do.
I'm wondering, having heard what Sanjeev has shared so far, what are the kinds of questions that you might have about his point of care breast cancer screening technology? What's the first thing that pops to mind?
I'd love to hear about how it's leveraging data and the fact that these days we can capture data from the field so quickly. One of the things that I think is really fascinating about the convergence of medical devices and diagnostics and then cloud infrastructure is that we're running a clinical trial with 100 patients can cost millions of dollars. Now now you can launch a product that gathers data and have data on thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of people and really just get a much better understanding of diseases and how they progress and that sort of thing. So I'm curious, being so experienced in that space, is how you think about that, the power of data and what impact you think it's going to have.
Well, so that's actually pretty interesting. There's another, if you look on LinkedIn, you'll see I've put on another company there called DXMe. DXMe is a company where I'm actually developing, we're working on developing an app where you can get patient data, right, in the field where, today you don't have, unless you've got a Kaiser or a Sutter or whoever, you don't have your own records. So people will be able to put in their own records and we can get access to that, right? Ultimately, you can use that data to go in and analyze and project if someone's getting a certain disease, et cetera, right? So that's what we are kind of planning to do. So what, this information which you get from the field using this digital data is going to be invaluable, because now you can actually plan out what is going on, not just based on the tests that are being done or just the the drugs which are being given, but literally on the history and all of that in real time, because you got all that information, right? And that's not been there in the past, right? So the app we are trying to do is not just for the Kaisers and of the world, but this is for you as a layman. And then we want to integrate that into these point of care devices as well. So it would be interesting. You and I should talk, because some of this would be pretty interesting for us to collaborate on.
Yeah.
Look, everybody, magic has been done.
Excellent.
Michelle,
Yeah,
you had raised
continue.
you had a question too.
Sorry, what?
I thought Michelle had a question too. She had raised her
Oh, yes,
hand.
of course. Sorry, Michelle.
So I'm working on a novel technology that's like a respiratory assist device. So it's like kind of to try to help you prevent needing to be on a ventilator. We are working on an emergency use right now, and we were wanting to apply for emergency use in India. And I didn't know if you knew anything about that process. Here, right now, you don't necessarily have to have a 510K clearance. You can just interact with the agency about what your risks and benefits are and the controls you have, for this duration. But in India, from the research I've done, it seems like they're really focusing on devices that are already fully cleared in other markets. Do you know anything about what's happening right now with the emergency?
So for emergency purposes, they are allowing devices to be brought in pretty quickly. And if you've got clearances in other places or approvals, it becomes easier. or if you're already marketing it, there's something called, if you're marketing it in the home country, right, then the approval process is pretty easy. You file the equivalent of a 510K in India, and our distributor partner who's there, I can talk to them and get some information and get back to you.
Okay, that'll be helpful. Thank you.
Tell us more India stories.
Pardon me?
Tell us more India stories.
I'd actually love to ask a specific question about that, if it's
Yeah.
okay.
You're the man.
You talked about kind of building out a company there, and of course the benefit of the cost of labor there. And I've got a good friend who launched the company, and he had a really interesting path too, where it was based in the U.S., but he was from Vietnam originally, and Vietnam had a program where they would pay top students to come to American universities for their PhDs, and then in return they sort of had to come back and work in Vietnam for 3 to 5 years. But they would go back there, and there weren't a lot of opportunities. These are people with PhDs in engineering and science and that sort of thing. So he just opened his R&D center there in Vietnam, hired all of these top tier graduates from top universities in the U.S. who were fluent in English, and just developed some really great technology at a fraction of the cost. That seems like such a powerful arbitrage. But I'm curious, for somebody who's, for him it was easy because he understood the culture and the systems and everything there. For you, presumably you also understand how to work in India, but for other organizations, like what are the pitfalls and the opportunities, and how do they go about maybe opening an office there or leveraging those resources without, I do feel like there are a lot of pitfalls if you don't know the culture, if you don't know the systems, if you don't know how to hire correctly, you can fall into some problems. So just love to hear about that.
Sure. So it's interesting, similar to your friend, but I'd moved here. I moved out of India back in 1976. I was still in high school at that time, and so when I went back to India in 2005, it was pretty much a foreign country to me as well. Having said that, I knew the language, which made it much easier. But literally, I had to find partners who, and through my network, I was able to find people who I could work with. And those are the people who essentially led me around. There was a buddy of mine whose friend had gone to school with, they had gone to engineering school together, and he was the consul general here in San Francisco. So I met him, and he connected me to some of the top people in India, and that's how I was able to network. But literally, you need to find someone who can lead you around there. You trying to go it on your own, it's tough because you don't know who to trust, who not to trust. And there are a lot of organizations who say, hey, we can do the clinical trials and get, for example, get the data done. And if you're not careful, they'll give you data which is false. And I would not trust them. So you have to be very careful. There are a few of them still left out there, right? And even the government has cracked down on them, but still there are some of them, and you have to be careful about that, right? Or same thing about fundraising or setting up the company itself. They are, unlike the US, you can go and incorporate a company within a day out here, right? You get onto the Delaware website and you can do that, or whichever website you want. But there you have, each director has got to have, be registered with the government before you can even file a company. So you need local people just to help you through that whole process. But you can have a wholly owned subsidiary of a US entity in India today, which you couldn't do back in the 90s or early 2000s. But finding the right partner, and especially if you can find someone who's had experience in India and is located here, they'll be able to guide you best. you know, if you guys are looking at doing something like that, I can make introductions. I mean, I'm getting busy with OnCourse and DX now, but I can certainly make introductions to people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Dr. Brent, you've got that interesting technology that I'm trying to unmute you. You've self-muted. You've got that interesting urological device that is for remote patient monitoring based. And I know that this pandemic has done you no favors in terms of rushing to market, but what are your plans, if any, to enter the Indian market?
Well, we started out as a device aimed at being RPM for urology. Now, because of the COVID-19, it sort of sped up our plans to use the same device, which is a portable urine meter used by the patient in the ambulatory setting, to look at exploring hospital markets and post-acute care markets, post-hospital discharge even. So we've actually formed a second company, and we're looking at using that as a vehicle to explore those markets. Our global plans, there's enough business domestically that'll keep us running full time from now until probably 2 years from now. We probably won't have any global expansion plans till 3 years from now. And our first global jump would probably be EU, followed by Japan. Those are markets that are very similar to the US markets in terms of their need for care. So India
Just
would
relax.
be 4 or 5 years.
As your marketing buddy, I somewhat rhetorically ask you, what if Sanjeev knows a guy who would love to run with your concept and let you not really focus on India while he or she attempts to introduce it to India? Would that be of interest?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what's happened to us is because of the demand brought on by the coronavirus pandemic, we've had a lot of companies come to us and say, we have a market, what you have developed fits that market. Let us take it, let us distribute it. And we have almost become an OEM to certain specialty markets like that. So we're not saying we wouldn't do India, it's just saying we haven't explored it. I probably know the least about entering India with a product of anybody in this screen right now. So it would be hard to say what's involved in that.
Okay, well, side conversation, I think.
So, Dr. Brent, one of the suggestions I'd have is look at the market in India. It generally, the pricing may be a little lower to enter the market, but the volumes are dramatically higher. And one of the things, for example, with POC Medical Systems, when we went in, we were actually looking at the US market. We were not looking at Indian market at that time when Joe and I had met way back. But then my partner in India approached me and we talked about it. And in just one state, we had orders for $20 million worth of product, which was about 1,800 machine and 10 million test kits, right? Just one state alone. And you're looking at and this was one of the smaller states, Gujarat, and the other states had started to follow, and they because they don't have the infrastructure right now, they're willing to go the extra mile and get that infrastructure in place right away. And so for example, with point of care, there's a lot of, in the US, it wasn't that much of an issue, right? Because in US, point of care was, well, big deal. You can go to a lab and get the thing done. Why do you need to get breast cancer testing done today, right? But in India, if you go into the villages or you go into the tier 2, tier 3 cities, you don't have the labs. You don't have the doctors who are willing to go into these places. So the need is is different, right? And so they're willing to spend the funds and to put in all this infrastructure using different technologies, which may not be that, critical in the US, right? And so the market is, you look at it, over 1.3 billion people, right? And about 10% are the very rich, and then you got about another 30%, which is the middle class, and the government itself is funding the people who don't have that much income. So literally, if you take, let's say, 50% of the market itself, right, between government and the rich and the middle class, you literally have a market bigger than the US right there. So I would not discount that market.
Yeah, no, I'm not discounting, just saying, I don't understand the reimbursement setup. I mean, so much of what we do in medical devices is driven by available reimbursement. Now, in the US, for instance, fortunately, with CMS moving so quickly last year to fully reimburse RPM technology, reimbursement in the US right now is very generous for what we do. I have no idea, for instance, what reimbursement patterns are like or policies are like in India. I assume there's not any reimbursement for it. I assume it's probably out of pocket.
It's everything is out of pocket, or the government is paying for it. So if you get the government sold on it, the government buys it from you and does the whole thing. You don't have to worry about reimbursement. They're, and people pay out of their own pockets. So, and now the healthcare insurances are coming into place, mostly because the companies which have come in from the US offer health insurance. The Indian companies never offered health insurance, but they themselves had programs where they paid for the employees' health benefits.
But I think given the setup of healthcare in India, you would really have to have an India-based partner who really understood all of the ramifications of, of distribution and regulatory and all the rest of it. I don't think it's something you'd wander into as a novice in India.
Exactly. No, you can't, and that's what I was saying earlier to Jose as well. You can't just go in by yourself. You have to have the right partner who understands how to deal with the government, how to deal with the private sector. Without that, I would not go in.
No, it's certainly some point in the future it'd be interesting. And just the current need, the current demand domestically and even in the EU is so large that we will be hard pressed to meet it over the next 3 years. But probably after that point, we'll be looking at where else we would want to take it. And is there the right partner? That's probably the majority of the whole consideration is there the right person, the right partner, right organization that can take it and effectively move it into the Indian market? And how do you know that that's the right party?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, option is you could find the partner who, you could license it to someone and they could manufacture and make it and you get royalties and not have to worry about it, right? Licensing fee, etc. That's another strategy you could look at.
And we're thinking about that. That's something we are thinking about because we just need a better way to handle the volume.
Sure.
And too much of our own bandwidth and resources tied up in it.
Right.
Okay, good, interesting.
Now for a change of pace, let's just have York, why don't you unmute yourself and introduce yourself. This is your first MDG premium call. Nope, not yet. Attendee is self-muted. Okay, oh, there you go. Let's try.
How about that? Can you hear me now?
Can, yes, hi.
Hi, I'm York. I've been involved in product development in medical devices for most of my career, and attended a few of Joe's 10X conferences in the past. I think I've met Michelle before, so just like to stay involved. Hi, Michelle.
And when people are doing what, they should think, oh, I should call you org.
Well, generally the people that I work with are startups, early stage. I do a lot of volunteering to help, young startups go in terms of consulting and just advice. Then, of course, doing actual product development when funding happens. That's kind of the time when I can help companies do all kinds of medical device development, including, hardware, electronics, software, etc.
Okay, and you're with Omnica, and how many folks work there?
There's 30 people at Omnica. Omnica's been around 35 years. Average tenure here is 16 years, so a very experienced group, and very strong in-house prototyping capabilities to kind of speed things up during development.
And you're in Southern California, as is Sanjeev, or are you Northern California?
I'm in Northern California. I'm in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I'm in Southern California, in Irvine, specifically.
Before I forget, if everyone stays until the end of the call, we will be singing happy birthday to Sanjeev, who is giving us this education on his birthday, and I thought it'd be a gift to us, and in return we reciprocate with the gift of song to him. The name of his talk was Why You Might Consider India for Research, Manufacturing, and Commercialization. Would you talk to us about the research part? When I think about clinical trials and the like, I don't first think about India. I think about Australia offering like 50% of your investment back by the government. I think about other incentives. I'm not aware of anything like that in India. Can you talk to us about it?
So in India, you don't have an incentive as far as being paid back by the government. But when you do clinical trials, so for example, we were with POC, we recruited almost 2,500 patients, right? We got the ethical committee clearances in less than a month in each of the organizations. There were 7 of the top hospitals which we recruited. Maulana Azad in Delhi, Tata Cancer Center in Calcutta, and Apollo, Manipal, etc. So some of the top hospitals were recruited. They had the clearances in about a month. We were able to recruit 2,400 patients, 2,500 patients in less than 3 months for the breast cancer trial, right? And it's something which would take forever in the US. So we were able to gather the samples. We got patient, we had the compliances ready, etc. Where patients had looked at the data, they had looked at the information, they had signed off. All of that was in place. As far as research was concerned, this was on the clinical trial part of it. But in regards to getting the research done, I'm getting the software which I mentioned earlier for DXME done right now. And so far, the software has cost me, for the app, it's cost me about $2,000 to get that done, right? And there's still more work to be done on that. But literally, to get things done, you're looking at about 1/3, 1/4 the cost. You can hire the people. Again, in places like Mumbai, Delhi, or Hyderabad or Bangalore, you'll find these people. That's where the talent is available. But when you want to go into manufacturing, then you go into the smaller cities. You don't want to stay in the bigger cities because the costs will be much higher. So you've got in a lot of these places, like in Mumbai, close to Mumbai, Pune, and Bangalore, they've got these incubation centers already in place where you can go in and set up the company and get hire the people and get the research done. You don't, it's like QB3 located right here in the Bay Area, right? Or where we are working out of right now for DXME and Oncos, we are working out of a place called Daybreak Labs in Livermore. The infrastructure is in place. You don't need to, buy a lot of equipment. You can get started, and then you can bring in people who are located there itself who are willing to help out. So, so research can be done pretty. You can show proof of concept pretty fast, and then once you've shown the proof of concept, you can apply for the grants from the government and set up your research facility, etc. from there. So that's how I'd done it with Actus as well. And same thing, we were planning on doing it with POC. Unfortunately, the company shut down by that time.
It sounds to me as though India could do a better job marketing the incredible availability of patients. I mean, 2,500 patients signing up in that amount of time is extraordinary. And it sounds as though it might be, I'm not going to give you any cash back, but it's going to be inexpensive enough that when you consider the time you save, that it should be a market that the world considers for clinical trials. Would you say that with your knowledge of all these things?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, give you a sense of the cost for the clinical trial, everything included in India was going to run us about $200,000. So there's no way you could do a 2,400 patient trial for diagnostics in the US for that much. Now, having said that, I would not use necessarily a clinical trial organization. This is if you set it up yourself, right? But if you use the organization which already exists, they'll charge you about half the price, right? That of the US. But if you can set up your own organization or work with your partner distributor out there, you can do it for about 1/4, easy.
Sanjeev, are you having any difficulties with getting follow-up for the patients? I know a lot of times the concern is not getting them to sign up, but to get them to follow up whenever there's follow-up requirements for the study.
No, so we had CRAs, and we had people who were located who would go out to these places and get that done. So we didn't really have a problem with that. I mean, but you do have to be very diligent about that. And a lot of people, if you have to follow up. You can't wait for them to come back and give you all that information. So you have to be very proactive about it.
Okay. How about a tool like using cell phones for capturing feedback from patients without them actually showing it back up at the doctor's office?
So
like a patient-reported outcomes?
So that is something we had done. We had all our CRAs, they had cell phones, and they used to go into these locations. But just giving it to the people, you don't know whether they'll call back or not, right? So it is best that you have regular follow-up visits with them.
So
a lot of times
more along the lines of it would be more along the lines of CRA going out with a tablet and doing interviews with the people?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. And that's what we had done.
Okay.
So the state of POC now is you declared bankruptcy, but you have new concepts. Are you trying to resurrect it somehow? Do you still own the IP?
So we have filed new patents on the instrumentation as well as the CD technology, which you remember. So we're essentially in on course. We have filed the new patents, and we are resurrecting the company, starting it off. I've just started the process of fundraising for the company. Just as of yesterday, we started sending out the business plans to potential VCs who have expressed interest and other investors. So just started that process. But literally, the new IP that we have created, there were some issues on the POC medical system technology, which wouldn't give us the same sensitivity specificity, which I believe the new technology is going to give. So, we were expecting between 85 to 90% sensitivity specificity. I think we can get closer to 95 to 98% with the new technology.
I opened our conversation with the challenge of a friend's extremely bad Indian experience trying to commercialize there, and you said a lot has changed.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell him now? I mean, he's been burned. Would you say you could confidently assert that enough has changed that you should think about India in a new way?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when I went back in the 90s, we were selling product to the Indian companies. We had similar experiences back in 2000. From the beginning, when I started Actus back in 2003 to the time I left, I'd seen a massive change, and now with POC, I've seen even a more dramatic change. I'll say it's been very dramatic since 2011 to 2017. For me to get the approval to do the clinical trial for the drug that we were coming up with at Actus took us a year and a half, 2 years almost. To get the approval to do the clinical trial for the POC product, Mammo Alert, it took us about a month and a half to 2 months. So there's been a dramatic change in the country, and the perception on with the new government coming in, which came in 4 years back or 6 years back, they changed everything around.
Are the financial changes some of the biggest impactors, eliminating some of the corruption and bribing?
Exactly. I mean, basically, when they went digital, they were able to get rid of a lot of that stuff, right? And they also, I know there were people when I was running Actus, and they were all retired. So with the new blood coming in, and they want to be global in nature, they've stopped. The younger generation is not, I won't say they're not completely, clean, but they are much, much better than the older generation was, right? And a lot of them, they grew up in the time when there was bribery, etc. Those people have retired and gone, right? And the new generation is more about getting things done. The pay scales are much better, right? So you don't need to worry about getting, bribes to live, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot more jobs available compared to back in the 80s and 90s and 70s.
Yeah.
Does anyone have a question for Sanjeev specifically about India?
I've got one. I've got, this is Rick Stockton. I've got a client or two who are doing a lot of their manufacturing business for medical device, or they're having their tooling done as an injection molding tooling. Oh, there we go. Share my webcam. They're having their tooling done over in China right now, and in order to diversify a little bit more and not have everything just coming from one place, what are the opportunities comparatively? How does outsourcing to India compare with outsourcing to China?
Well, so outsourcing to China has been, I mean, I looked at for Actus, for POC, I was doing the outsourcing into China, right? But the tooling costs are much, much lower in China, and, or in Malaysia, they're much lower. But the actual injection molding cost is dramatically lower in India. So it was interesting. We got our tooling done in Malaysia, and we were going to get a larger scale tooling done in China, but then we were going to move the whole thing to India to get the large scale manufacturing done there. That was the plan that we had laid out, right? Because the actual per unit cost was much lower getting it done in India. And with the Make in India scheme that the government has introduced, they do give you incentives for that.
And I've got one more question, and it may be outside the realm of this, but I've been reading for some time. India has literally made world history with its introduction of economical prosthetics and things like this. Things designed so that they can be sold to normal people who don't have huge amounts of money to pay for medical devices. Mm-hmm. Is that still and I haven't been able to do as much reading as I want to, but is that still a large center for for low cost, I like to call it people-based cost medical devices?
Yeah, so they actually call it frugal innovation in India. Basically, so you got you're talking about the prosthetics, which is, I think, done in Jaipur.
The Jaipur knee, starting with, yeah.
That's right. And, so for example, so anything, they're looking at reducing costs so dramatically so that it can be made available to the 60% of the population which lives in rural communities or non-urban sectors of the society, right?
Oh yeah.
And so everything that the government is pushing for low-cost innovation, right? And that's why they actually liked what we were doing at POC, because it was a low-cost innovation. We were talking about, and same thing with Oncos. We're talking about being able to do testing for breast cancer for less than $5 a patient.
God.
So with the device that we were looking at, we could do it. We were looking at the machine itself, which is a spectrophotometer and essentially a lab combined in one instrument, for about $1,500 per machine, and the disc, which could test for 10 to 12 patients, costing us about $7 to $8 to make, maximum 10, and the government would pay us about $20 to buy it, and so literally you're talking about $2 a patient, right? And so the government was going to take that and apply it for each and every woman out there and get everyone tested. Door-to-door cancer screening is something which Prime Minister Modi had announced throughout, in his weekly talk with the people.
Very nice. I know that was kind of at the periphery, but I appreciate it.
Sure.
I usually don't.
Thank you, Rick. I have a question from Jonathan. He had to jump off. The punchline of it is, do you think that India will accelerate past the US in diagnostics? And the reason he asks is the potential success of home and neighborhood point of care versus hospital-based testing, similar to the boom in technology adoption, skipping from wired telephony and cable to mobile. So given how the US has invested so much in hospitals, do you think that India could catch up and accelerate past?
I like to draw the analogy of the cell phone versus the landline. You know, if you really look at the cell phones, they really took off much faster in the Asia Pac Pacific Rim region, right? Way before it took off here in the US. We had landlines. We did not want AT&T, etc. Didn't want to give up all that, right? And everyone could get free incoming calls. But here in the US, you had to pay for incoming calls, if you remember back in the 90s and early 2000s. Whereas in India, you don't have to worry about that. Same thing is going to happen in diagnostics. Because the infrastructure doesn't exist, they want to get diagnostics to each and every person. And so we are talking to the government about taking a machine and putting it in a kiosk in every village. So now you could put on tests onto that and literally get each and every person tested in every village. So tomorrow, let's say there's another pandemic like the COVID, you don't have to worry about having these people rush out to the hospitals, which are, a day away. You don't have the proper infrastructure for these people to get out, etc. So telemedicine, as it's coming about with digital health and with point of care, I think is something which India is going to adopt. Unlike the US people are saying you don't require it as much. You've got the infrastructure. Why do you need it? But in India, they're actually wanting it. They want to put it in place. So I hope that answers this question.
I think it does. York, you had a question you wanted to ask. Do you want to just unmute yourself, or shall I ask for you? Nope, you're muted. Not because of, oh, it is because of me. Now go ahead.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yep.
Yeah, so I've had some exposure to various companies and people who looked at expanding to India. The reports I've gotten back really have been more, that the acceptable price levels there in India are just so low. It's very difficult to bring a product from the U.S. there because the margins are just, non-existent practically. So is that still the case, or do you really have to have a local partner and manufacture the product there if you're serious about penetrating that market?
So you're absolutely right. In India, if you try to take the product as it is and try to sell it there, it will not sell. I was talking to the guys at BD in Singapore, and they mentioned that the price point for diagnostics, testing was about $2 to $3, which is really the case. But in the US, you can get paid a lot more, right? So you can't use the same price. You can't have the same cost and the pricing which you have in the US. It's not just about manufacturing it in India. It's also designing in things which are relevant for, not just India, but even if you look at Africa or any of those emerging economies, you need those kind of things. For example, you need the telemedicine part of it, right? It's not just having a diagnostic kit there, because now the information needs to get out to the doctor. So even if you do the test and the doctor is not there, what do you do with it, right? My cousin runs the WHO program for TB testing in my hometown, and he tells me that from the nearby villages and towns, they get all the samples, and about 50% of the samples have already gone bad, right? So they need point of care there, right? They need diagnostics located locally, and they need telemedicine because the doctors don't want to get out there. So they need that information given right away to the doctor, and the doctor can look at it and give feedback in real time so that the patient knows what to do. No, they can't keep waiting for, if a patient's got to travel from a village to, let's say, Mumbai, and it takes a day and a half, and if the infrastructure is not great, they miss their train or whatever, they have an appointment with the doctor, they miss the appointment with the doctor. Now they don't get an appointment for another month or 2 months because there are other patients already waiting, right? And so the issues are very, very different, right? And they don't have that much money to pay that kind of cost, because this is out of pocket costs which have to be paid, right? You don't have CMS paying it, or you don't have a Medicare program, you don't have health insurance. So everyone pays out of their pocket. The government has set aside now money which they give to, I think it's like about 5,000 rupees a month to anyone who earns less than, I think, 20,000 rupees or something a month, right? That's for their medical expenses. And if you're going to charge more than that, people won't be able to afford it. So if you can bring the cost down by developing the technology in a way that it will be low in cost, and then you can manufacture it at a much lower cost, that's what they want. And that's what we were planning to provide at POC, and that's what we are doing at OnCourse. And if you do that, you can get larger volumes, right? So it's are you looking at, the analogy here is, are you looking at the Macy's Nordstrom model, or are you looking at the Walmart model? It's volumes.